All right. So anyway, let me, of course, bring up the lecture course that we've been kind of working on. I believe we're still talking about the 5 good emperors. I don't think we've gotten past them, have we? I don't think we've done that pretty much as far as I know. I can't remember which emperor it was I stopped at, but I believe it was, I know we talked about the first 1 or 2. I know we talked about Nerva. We talked about him. I don't think we really got into talking about, I think we talked about how Nerva was the one that started the whole Nerva dynasty. I think we had talked about that. And then I talked about how he started the whole adoptive process of, which a lot of the 5 good emperors were known as the adoptive emperors, of course, more or less. And I don't think I got the Trajan. I think that was the emperor. I think I may have started out. I don't know, maybe I did. I don't think I talked about him yet. So I'll kind of go back and talk about Trajan a little bit. I haven't done that yet at this point. But yeah, the second emperor was Trajan. I don't think I've got a picture of him. I used to have a picture of him, but I do have a slide on him I can show you, which is right here. I think he was the one that was a Spanish emperor. He was born in Spain. He and, of course, his adopted son, Hadrian, who also came later, of course, was the other one. That was emperor as well. I thought I talked about Hadrian, both those 2 guys, but send me a message or not, but I can't remember which one I did last time. But Trajan was the one that was known as Optimus Maximus. Optimus Princeps, they called him, which meant best ruler. And he was this military-style emperor. I think I told you that had really the size of the Roman Empire peaked under him, about 2 million square miles. And the empire stretched all the way to Dacia. I think we already did talk about this, I remember. And under him, the empire stretched into like Turkey and Iraq, like Armenia. The Tigris River was the eastern boundary of it. They think he also got into the Crimean Peninsula as well at one point. And also part of Jordan, like the area like kind of like to the east of Israel, and I think more to almost like Saudi Arabia at that time. And the size of the empire looked about that size, which you can see stretched from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to Iraq. They almost reached the Caspian Sea. They're very close to reaching the Caspian Sea. You can see in that picture. And then I think I already mentioned this before, but I think Trajan was the one that had built Trajan's Forum and all that in Rome. Trajan's Column, which is kind of in the middle of it, which is a famous victory column that he built that kind of celebrated his victory in Dacia, which is what they call Romania a long time ago. And then, of course, I think I already talked about, I believe I did talk about Hadrian. I thought I did. Hadrian, I think we mentioned about him already, I thought. He was another Spanish emperor. That was the one that was called the Greekling. And he was known for being fond of Greek culture, Greek architecture. He was actually an amateur architect. And Hadrian was the one that later went on to build like the Hadrian's Wall and the Pantheon Temple in Rome and all of that. And he was the one that was a patron of the arts. He was big into Greek culture. And in that little video you saw, of course, Hadrian, of course, constructed what they call Hadrian's Wall, which was built, of course, to block a lot of the barbarians that were in Scotland, like the Picts that were up there in northern Scotland, which were a threat to, I guess, Roman civilization in the south. And so they built that fortification across the northern border there. That was basically the northern border of Britain, I think up to like close to 410 CE, sometime in the early 400s. It's about 80 miles long, but I think in length it's actually a little shorter than that. So they kind of the video, they had kind of talked about that. Anyway, I think we already did that. I already talked about that already. Now, I did want to get into and talk about, so we did talk about Pantheon already, I believe, which I did. I covered that already, I know, also as well, because I thought I'd showed you a picture of the Pantheon, all that before, because I did that. Now, I need to get into the Antonines as well, who they were. The Antonines, of course, were this other, kind of screwing that up to date. The Antonines, of course, were a famous dynasty that was part of the Five Good Emperors period. And it expands for you right here, but 161 to about 192. That would be the years for the Antonines. And it was named after Antoninus Pius, who was one of like four emperors. They had Antoninus Pius, they had Marcus Aurelius, who was like his nephew through his wife. I think it was like his wife's nephew. And then Lucius Verus was actually adopted. So both of them were adopted by basically Antoninus. Those two are kind of considered like brothers, sort of. Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus. And Lucius Verus was kind of a famous general later. That was under Marcus Aurelius. And then you had Commodus was the fourth one. Of course, they had two, who was the son of Marcus Aurelius as well. So those are the four that are part of the Antonines that they had. Antoninus wasn't really known for too much. You can see there, he's the one that built the what they call the Antonine Wall. The Antonine Wall was just this wall that was built in northern Britain. It was actually in Scotland, like above what is Hadrian's Wall. It was about 40 miles long overall. Antoninus Pius is considered to be, he was the, they say he was the longest reigning emperor behind what is Tiberius. So he would be like third longest overall. Was how long he reigned overall. So third longest, about 23 years was how long Antoninus was in power. And then they consider his reign to be like the peak of the Pax Romana. There weren't too many wars under his reign too much. And then after he died, the empire started kind of going down from there. But they later abandoned the Antonine Wall. I think I've got a picture showing a picture of him and the Antonine Wall, but it was built about 142. You can see up here by the Firth of Forth. There's Scotland up here, and they abandoned it after he died, and then they went back to Hadrian's Wall, and Hadrian's Wall pretty much stayed as the northern border, I think, until close to the collapse of the Roman Empire and all that. Now the one that's more famous I need to get into, who's of course known as Marcus Aurelius, who's of course well known. Mostly I'm going to talk about him the most out of the Five Good Emperors. He's really considered the most famous one of the Five Good Emperors. So the last one he reigned about 19 years, 161 to 180. He did co-rule, by the way, with his brother, kind of like adopted brother, with Lucius Verus, who was actually, like I said, a Roman general under him. And both were adopted by Antoninus Pius. But Marcus Aurelius, by the way, was the nephew of Antoninus Pius through his wife, like I said. And yeah, he is one of the greatest emperors of the 2nd century. If you know about Marcus Aurelius, he's got one of the very few books that was actually written by an emperor. We actually get to read his thoughts, and all that. And he wrote this, well, yeah, kind of like a diary or tome, I think is what some people call it, which is called Meditations, or usually called also the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. It was written like when he was on campaign in a bunch of wars. It's like a lot of personal writings about himself, similar to like a diary that was written in 12 books. And it was based off of the idea of Stoic philosophy, or what they call Stoicism, which was popular in the Roman Empire, which started in Greece. Stoicism started by this Greek philosopher named Zeno, Z-E-N-O. And So yeah, it's like one of the very few books, you get letters and things like that. You sometimes see, or edicts, from emperors, but you really don't see too many books that are actually written by an emperor or something like that. And it was never meant for publication. That's true about that, pretty much. And they think he wrote it. I know during the Marcomannic Wars, I think is when they think he wrote it, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Yeah, and that's the one thing that Marcus Aurelius is known for. He's known for fighting in a lot of wars. Here's, of course, a picture of Marcus Aurelius right there. You will notice one thing that's kind of weird about the emperors. I don't know if it's weird, but it's kind of a fad you start seeing in the 2nd century. They all have beards. Going back to the 1st century, they're all shaven and stuff like that. That's something you start seeing. Like all the statues, they got beards, which is kind of different. So it must have been some kind of fad they went through, kind of like today. Like a lot of people like to have beards today. But yeah, he did fight a lot of wars. The big one, he was in a Parthian war, I know, with the Parthians, and then he fought the Germans also as well, which they say under him the Pax Romana starts to come to an end. So things start to kind of come unraveled, especially on their borders and all that. Then after he dies, the Pax Romana ends. And two big wars he was in. He was in the Marcomannic Wars, they called it, which took up most of his reign. And that was where he fought for control of the Roman border around the Danube River, like between Rome and what is the Roman Empire and Germania, which is what they call the area of Germany. And you had all these different barbarians. Well, they called them barbarians, Germanic peoples that wanted to come into the empire, settle there. I think you hear about the Huns coming in, and they start pushing them out, and they want to come settle here in the Roman Empire. And so that was his most famous war he was in. He was actually successful with it, by the way, and stopped them, but after him, they don't stop them. The Germans just keep coming, and other peoples, and eventually the Roman Empire collapses because of just getting invaded. Then, of course, the Parthians, which were kind of this new Iranian Persian empire, like in Iraq, Syria, and all that kind of came about, so-called Parthian Empire. And he got into the so-called Roman Parthian Wars as well, which I think he mostly fought like in Syria and Iraq against them. And his brother was mostly involved in that, Lucius Verus. He was a pretty good general, by the way, under him. And he actually sacked their capital. I think it's called Ctesiphon, which is actually in Iraq. It's actually near where Baghdad is today. It's where it was originally. But they actually sacked it and defeated them for a short time. And the Parthians kind of a pain in the butt to the Romans for years. They fight continuous wars against them. Then Marcus Aurelius died in 180. His son succeeded him, who, by the way, was already co-ruling with him, which, of course, is Commodus, who you may have heard of. I think I've got a picture of Commodus, of course, I can share with you, who's right here. Commodus was kind of unstable, if you know much about it. Reason what happened to my screen, but it went out for some reason. It does that once in a while. I don't know why, but anyway, he was kind of unstable. You'll see later he's kind of crazy. He's kind of mad, kind of like Caligula. They think he may have been a megalomaniac, and so of course some people even think that he was also insane as well. And he would take over. He, of course, Commodus was the last of the Antonines to stay in power, which he would be for about 12 years or so. And they kind of view him as being the emperor that ends the Pax Romana. So he's one that pretty much ends. And so 180 CE is usually considered to be the date when the Pax Romana ends. That's the traditional date that they put. And he had this cult of personality where he thought he was part God. I think he thought he was Hercules or something like that, because he would dress like Hercules. Yeah, he would. He would dress up like Hercules, and he would fight in the Colosseum like a gladiator. That's what he was known for. And of course, the people loved it. They thought it was great. But a lot of the people in like this, the government and the senators and all that thought he was really crazy, just out of his mind. He even wanted to try to rename Rome. He was going to name it after himself. He wanted to call it Commodiana, but I don't think that went down well. So he's unstable. And of course, eventually what happened was he was assassinated in 192. I think in the movie Gladiator, he's killed in the Colosseum, but in reality, I think the Roman writers talk about the fact that he was murdered. I think they strangled him or something. He was murdered. He was in taking a bath or something, and somebody came in and strangled him, and he was dead. So that's what actually happened to him. So it touches off a war from 192 to 193, and which lasted about a year or so. In 193, they actually had 5 emperors at one point that actually reigned, that was on the throne. And it was known, 193 in Roman history was known as the year of the 5 emperors, because they had 5 emperors that reigned. And luckily, there was a general that I guess had any sense, that came into power, and that was Septimius Severus. He seized power, who was a Roman general, anyway, so he came in at that point, and he took over, and he starts a new dynasty at that point, which is called the Severan Dynasty, is what they call it, which will reign from actually 193 to 235. It's considered to be the 5th dynasty that they have in Rome. And not sure what's going on with my screen. My thing went out again. It keeps going that for some reason. But anyway, it was the 5th imperial dynasty they have overall. They have like 6 emperors that are actually part of the Severan dynasty. He reigns for about, you can see, close to 18 years. He actually co-rules a little later with he has 2 sons that he co-rules with as well. Severus was an interesting guy. He was actually from Africa. So it was like the first African emperor that actually would reign over the throne. And he's actually from Libya, a place called Leptis Magna, which is a famous city. The ruins of it are still in northern Libya today. And they think he's like a Phoenician origins or something like that. It's kind of a debate about, I guess, what his origins were. Maybe he was part black. That's quite possible as well. So anyway, so he would come in, he would stabilize the empire, but the empire under him was very militaristic. The army was really powerful under him, and the Roman Senate was very weak. It became weak and not really as important as it used to be. I think that pretty much the Senate starts being pretty much like a rubber stamp. And the monarch and the military start, controlling everything overall. He also, Septimius Severus, also married this woman from Syria named Julia Domna. She would go on to be his empress consort, and she was really powerful. In fact, she was considered one of the most powerful empress consorts probably Roman history. I think the only one that's like real big was Empress Theodora. You may have heard of her, who was the wife of Justinian the Great, who was later a Byzantine emperor. And they would actually have 2 sons who were actually twins, by the way. And I think it's the only set of twins that actually reigned, I think, on the throne and all that. Geta and Caracalla. Those are the 2, of course, emperors that reigned, that actually shared power for a few years. I think they were on power. They were actually in power. Their father reigned with him, and then after their father died, they reigned together. They didn't really like each other. Apparently, Geta was the more popular emperor. Caracalla was a nickname. His real name was Antoninus. That's what they called him. But he went by the name Caracalla because he wore this cloak all the time, which was called a Caracalla. So he got the name Caracalla. It kind of stuck. Of course, if you know what happened with the two, Caracalla later murdered Gaeta. Sounds like the Romulus and Remus story all over again. But after her father died, he basically killed off his brother and ruled by himself for a few years after that. Caracalla was known for developing the baths of Caracalla, which is like one of the last major Roman baths that were built in Rome. It's well known, which I think is now ruins today. But he built that during his reign. And then he also issued this edict that's famous called the Edict of Caracalla, which was done in 212. What it did was it granted Roman citizenship to all Romans that were free, throughout the whole empire. And it was mostly done for taxation and all that. They had a few other emperors. They weren't very famous, like Macrinus and Elagabalus. They kind of came next, who weren't really related to them. They kind of just seized power. And then really the one on the bottom there, Alexander Severus, was really the only other one that was actually related back to the Severans, who actually reigned the longest after that for about 13 years. He was a cousin of Gaeta and Caracalla. But what's interesting about all these emperors is that all of them, except for the first one, Septimius Severus, were actually murdered. They were actually killed. It's crazy about this. So 5 out of 6 were actually murdered. So it was a bloodthirsty, dynasty and all that. That was actually part of it. So after Alexander Severus died in 235, what happened was there was a period that came in where after the Severans collapsed, the Roman Empire almost collapsed itself. There's actually a period of anarchy. They call it all kinds of names: the crisis period, the Imperial Anarchy, the military anarchy, or Imperial Crisis. You have this case where there's total political anarchy and instability, not just in the empire, but behind the throne itself. And you have this case where what happened in the Roman Empire in the 3rd century was that the Roman Empire was totally controlled by the military. And so what occurred was all of the I guess the armies and the generals that were part of the armies started fighting for control of the whole empire, like in the throne. And so you'd have a case when an emperor would die, one of the armies would just say, "Hey, our general's emperor now." They declare him emperor. The next thing you know, you got guys fighting each other, and stuff like it's kind of like a civil war. And so one army might claim this general's an emperor, and the other one up here is emperor too. So you might have more than one, claim it actually. So in that period from 235 to 284, there were about 30 emperors that actually reigned in a period of like 50 years. So average reign of an emperor was like less than 2 years. It was actually pretty bad. In fact, there was actually a year. What year was it? It was the year 238. They had 6 emperors. In fact, 238 AD in the Roman Empire is often called the year of the 6 emperors. That's crazy. So 6 emperors. So not very good with that. Also, the Roman Empire almost broke up. It actually had a case where there were actually 3 separate states that actually formed. They had the Roman Empire, which was in the middle, which included Spain, North Africa, Italy, and Greece. Then they had this part called the Gallic Empire that kind of broke off, and that included Gaul and Britain. They kind of started having their own separate state. And you may have heard of the Palmerin Empire. It was this empire that kind of formed in the east, Turkey, Syria, and Egypt. And it had a capital that was called Palmyra. You may have heard of Palmyra because it was sacked by ISIS. If you know about this, like a few years ago, ISIS sacked it, like in modern times, with like the ruins of it. I think they destroyed it, like part of it or something like that, the ruins of it, which is in Syria. That's where it's at. So it was based in Syria, that empire. And a lot of this started like in the, I think like 260s is when it started breaking up. And then eventually about 274, there was an emperor named Aurelian came in, and he was able to combine it back together, reunite it. But obviously you see there the damage was done. And so after that onwards, the Roman Empire started really declining between the 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries. And then the West gets invaded, by Germans and all that. And that pretty much kills it off later. Of course, I'll get to that later about the Germans and all that, of course. Let me go ahead and move on. And of course, I want to talk about next this emperor named Diocletian that comes in, who's real famous. Diocletian's really the next great emperor that comes in. He kind of reigns between the late 3rd and early 4th centuries over a period of like close to 20 years. He's in power. In 21 years, it's about how long he was. He was a very interesting man, Diocletian. Diocletian rose up through the military, and I think his father was a slave. He was the son of a slave, rose up through the military, and eventually became like the head of the Praetorian Guard. And then eventually what happened was in about 284, he was able to seize power. And Diocletian became famous for creating a bunch of reforms to the Roman Empire to help stabilize it and all that. And then also another thing he did too that's very famous was he strengthened it as a more autocratic, position, as a ruler. So the emperors became more autocratic, which in the 3rd century, they were kind of, during that crisis period, they were becoming weaker. And he got rid of the title princeps. I told you about princeps had been the title going back to Augustus and all that. And so he brought in a new title that the emperor started using, which was dominus, which meant either lord or master. And so that was a new title that all the emperors would use, really at least until about 476. In fact, the late Roman Empire is often called the Dominate period of the Roman Empire, when all these emperors had that title, etc. Also, he adopted the title Jovius. For the word Jove was, the word that they would sometimes use also for Jupiter. And Jovius meant Jupiter's chosen one. So it's kind of got a religious title, all that as well that they have. He's famous for, if you know about Diocletian, Diocletian was the one that divided the empire in half into two halves, a Western Empire and a Western Empire and an Eastern Empire, which that the Roman Empire is famous for having later, the later part of it. And when he did that, the emperors that ruled over both halves were called an Augustus. That's what they called him, like a nickname. And they got the name from the original ruler, going back to Emperor Augustus, the first one. And they called that originally later the Diarchy, where they have these two rulers that are kind of reigning at first. But what will happen is in a couple of years, what he eventually does is he adds some kind of junior emperors under him to help rule the empire, which are called a Caesar. So under each Augustus, they have this subordinate type ruler, kind of like a vice emperor, if you want to call it that even, which they call it a Caesar, basically. And so now you get 4 rulers instead of 2 rulers. And the Greek name they dub it later, this type of new government is often called the Tetrarchy, which meant government ruled by 4 people, or ruled by 4, you want to call it for short, also as well. And the actual emperors are called, they're called Tetrarchs, the ones that rule over the actual empire. So why did they do this? Well, there's different reasons for it. One is that, the Roman Empire was so vast that it was just, it was easier for just, if you had more rulers. So 4 rulers could rule over, a large, vast area a lot easier than, say, 1 ruler. So it's a lot of micromanaging, if you got one guy trying to run everything. And so just, each guy would run various provinces of the empire, basically. So you'd have a Western Augustus and a Western Caesar, and then you have an Eastern Augustus and an Eastern Caesar. So kind of split. Also, you see on the bottom there, it also created some kind of form of succession. So if the Augustus died or something, like the Western ruler, he would get replaced by the Western Caesar. You see that, and same thing in the East, also as well. And it's not diagonally. So the guy in the Caesar that's in the West can't replace the guy in the East. So you can only go from bottom to top, like that. So that's kind of the method. I think I show that in a little slide here if you want to look at it later. But what happened was Diocletian set himself up as the Augustus in the East, and he put this guy in named Maximianus. I think they call him Maximian for short. He was put in as the Augustus of the West. He was a Roman general. These guys, I think, were generals too, I believe. Then he's got this Eastern Caesar under him named Galerius. And then Constantius the First, Chlorus, usually Constantius First for short, was the Western Caesar. So at first it was just two guys, and then they added the two others in 293. So that's basically how it started out, with this actual system that he created. It basically lasted about, I think it varies, but 10, 15 years or so. It kind of was around for a while. And let me also talk about the other thing that Diocletian is known for, which kind of, they give him a bad name. About this, is that he was the one that started the, it's actually kind of a reform, believe it or not. It was a reform where they went after Christians. There was an attempt actually to try to save the Roman traditional religions, which people call paganism later, ancient Roman paganism, you want to call it that later. And so, him and the Tetrarchs started basically sending out decrees and things like that to basically arrest Christians. If any Christians were in the government, in the military, they basically lost their job. They could be in prison or even killed. More or less. And so over like a 10-year period from about, they think it peaked about 303 to about 313. That's the peak period of the last major, anyway, Roman persecution of Christians. They had different names for it. The Catholic Church would later call it the Great Persecution, but they're not sure how great it really was. I think some claim that only a few thousand were actually killed. They've got 3,000 to 4,000 is what they think it actually was, believe it or not. And then people also call it the Diocletianic persecution, but they say it wasn't his idea. It was actually, I want to say it was Galerius or one of those emperors that egged him on to do it. So he got blamed for it later and all of that. But so that was something that was kind of well known. And then I'll get to it later, but Constantine the Great comes in later, another emperor. He basically ends all that. Now, eventually what happened was the Tetrarchy didn't last long. It collapsed due to civil war. It's one of the things that happened, more or less. And basically you had a deal where what caused it, if you know about this, is that Diocletian decided he was going to retire, which is true, which happened in 305. Diocletian decided he couldn't do his job anymore because he was ill. So he retired to Croatia, which is actually where he was from. And it's like where Yugoslavia used to be, on the Adriatic across from Italy. So he retired there. And basically civil war broke out because you had a case where several men started to fight over the position of Western Augustus. I actually had 3 men at one point that started fighting over it. Constantine the Great was the main one, of course, that fought it. Constantine was this Roman general that was actually the son of that guy Constantius the First, who I mentioned earlier. That was actually, I think, his son. He thought he should be the emperor because he was related to him. And then also Maximianus had been forced to retire by Diocletian. He wanted his job back, basically. And then Maxentius, he was the son of Maximianus. So he wanted it too. So you got 3 men wanting it, basically. And over time, what happened was Constantine eventually went on to defeat them all. So he beat them all. And so he would seize power eventually in the West as the Western Augustus overall. And in the middle of the war, if you know about this, supposedly there's a legend that Constantine decided to convert to Christianity. There's a legend that some of the Christian writers say that he saw some kind of sign in the sky, like a cross in the air. And he had all his men put crosses on their shields and all that. And they went on to win the war, Civil War. They think it's a made-up story, maybe. Because I think there's a theory that Constantine didn't really convert until on his deathbed. So that's might be the real truth about it. But anyway, but yeah, he would go. And then after that, what happened was in the East, he went on to conquer that too. And he eventually combined the empire into one state, which hadn't done that in a while. 324 to 337, you have just one empire with one sole emperor that you have. So he basically recombines everything into one empire at that point. Of course, I got a picture of Constantine, which is right there. Of course, in the Catholic Church, and I believe in the Orthodox Church, he's a saint. I believe that's right. And of course, there's his image on the left. And then, of course, image on a coin there, which you can see on the left. And there's one thing he's known for. Constantine was the first to develop the first symbol of Christianity, which is called the Chi Rho. If you know about that, which is what you're looking at. The Chi Rho looks like an X and a P through it. And the Chi Rho is just the first two letters of the Greek word Christos, which means Christ or Messiah, basically. So that became actually the first symbol. They say the Chi Rho is kind of where they get the fish. Like you ever see the fish in Christianity they use? It's supposedly a kind of a variation of it. But anyway, Constantine, talk a little bit about him and what he's known for. But you can see a bunch of stuff he did. It's probably not true about the Battle of Milvian Bridge. They say that's where he converted, but I don't know if that's true or not. Might be more of a legend. But I did want to talk about those three things there. Edict of Milan, the Council of Nicaea. And I need to, of course, talk about how he founded Constantinople. Of course, the other thing he did as well. Of course, his first big thing he did when he became emperor was he issued this edict in 313, which is called the Edict of Milan. It's one of like two edicts that were passed around that time, which began to ease the persecution of Christians. There was actually one named Licinius, another emperor, who had one called the Edict of Toleration, 311, which began to kind of relax the persecutions in like some parts of the empire, not all of it. But this one would, of course, legalize, the Christian religion throughout the Roman Empire. And it practically ended the persecutions. And so many Christians were in prison, they were let out, and they had their property taken from them. They were given it back as examples like that overall. And at the time, you could practice any religion, I think, pretty much in the Roman Empire. So Christianity was one of like several religions that was practiced in the Roman Empire. It won't be the sole religion until the end of the 4th century. That's when they'll start changing it. Then the most famous thing that really Constantine may have done was that he set up the Council of Nicaea, later called the First Council of Nicaea, which met in a little Greek city on the northern coast of Turkey called Nicaea. I think it's on the Black Sea, and it was an ecumenical council. What that means, it's a council of like Christian clergy, like bishops and so on, priests that met within the early church, the Christian church at the time. They came there to basically talk about the theology of the church, what it was going to be. Also, like the church canon, like church laws. They talked about what God was going to be, and also what the books they were going to have, like what kind of religious books they were going to use. They were part of the church. I think Constantine had them all bring like whatever kind of books that were in circulation, so that they could compile whatever they're going to need to create like the Bible that would be there later. One of the first things that they did at the council was they banned what they call Arianism, which had been a type of Christianity that had become popular within the Roman Empire. It was actually developed by this guy named Arius. who was a Libyan priest, like in Libya, who started kind of pushing this idea that God was made up of two things, the Father and the Son. He said that the Father had created the Son, but they weren't equal. They were actually separate from each other. And they call it Arianism or Christian Arianism. And Christians that practice are called Arians. And it's around for a while, even up to the Middle Ages. I think it was practiced for a while. And basically, they were rejecting, the idea of Trinitarianism, which was starting to become popular in the 2nd and 3rd centuries about what God was, all that. And so what happened was at the Council of Nicaea, they said that basically God is the Trinity, Trinitarianism. And they said that God is composed of three things, like three parts or three persons, but it's actually one God, which is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so this is something that the early church fathers in the Catholic Church started really kind of formulating back in the 200s. And so that became eventually, by the Council of Nicaea, the main belief that would be pretty much the part of most all Christian churches today. Except maybe a couple here and there. So like Unitarianism, I don't know if they don't believe that, I guess. But, and they also adopted this thing you may have heard of called the Nissian Creed as well, which they put into all the prayers and masses in Christianity. That's a profession of faith where you're forced to kind of accept the Trinity, basically, is what it is. So they put the Trinity in the actual, prayer in there about the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. And the word creed comes from the Latin word credo, which means I believe. So they're saying that you believe in the Trinity. So those that didn't, obviously, I guess that helped to kick them out because they don't believe in it. So also, too, as well, like the Easter dates, in Christianity today, which usually are, like I said, around April, like in the spring, about usually. Sometimes earlier or later, it usually was set by them. So the Council of Nicaea set when Easter would be, which usually coincides with Passover. Not always, but most of the time it does. It happens about the same time because it was believed that Jesus was crucified sometime around Passover. So that's why they put it there. And then also, if you know about it, the Council of Nicaea also moved the Christian Sabbath to Sunday. It was originally on Saturday a long time ago before the council met. And they mostly did it, but I think for two reasons. One was because the Jews and the pagans all had their holiday on Saturday. So that was their holy day, that kind of thing. I think they say the other reason they did it was because of the fact that Jesus resurrected on Sunday, like Easter Sunday. That was the other reason for it, too, as well. Constantine was also the one that commissioned the first Bibles, published in Greek. And so they compiled the New Testament at that time. I think maybe in the 330s is when the New Testament was eventually written down and compiled together as one book. And it was the Council of Nicaea that decided what gospel accounts would actually go and what books would go in the New Testament. They actually took a vote on it. I think the Gospels was really close. Like those four, it was like almost 50-50. So they were kind of questionable. And the ones that, of course, I told you that weren't accepted were considered apocrypha. They weren't considered maybe the original ones, or maybe the ones that were close to the original ones, because they say the original Gospels don't exist anymore, because these are like a second copy of it or something like that, they say. The New Testament was then, of course, translated, like right after they wrote it in Greek in the late 4th century. You may have heard of St. Jerome. He was one of the early church fathers. He began translating it. He translated the Bible, like the New Testament and also the Old Testament as well, into Latin. And so the Latin Bible would later be known as the Vulgate Bible. That's the one that's the standard Bible that the Catholic Church will use for years after that. All of that. So that's the one they use a lot in medieval times, and all of that. Now, one more thing I do need to talk, of course, about with Constantine is Constantine's the one that also founded a new capital, which is Constantinople, which got named after it. This was done about the year 330 CE. I think Constantine realized that the West was declining, and he wanted to basically create a new city, especially a new Christian city, I think was the main thing he was trying to do. Because I guess in the West, they were still kind of practicing, paganism and Christianity and all that. So he wanted to create a Christian city. And so he founded a city in what is now Western Turkey on the European side. It's kind of like right below the Black Sea, what they call the Sea of Marmara, they call it today. And they had different names they kicked around. Like there was one idea to call it New Rome, after the other one. That's in Italy, or Nova Rome, I think was the actual name they were going to use in Latin. However, the people didn't like the name. They decided to name it after Constantine. And so it's called Constantinople, which means Constantine City. Some people also called it the City. It was another name. They dubbed it because there wasn't really, the area's kind of isolated. You didn't have too many big cities there. And so people would often just call it that. Let's go to this. They would say, let's go to the city. That's the only big city nearby. That's, they say, where the name Istanbul came from over time. It was a variation of that saying, let's go to the city, So now Constantinople was built on a heavily fortified peninsula, which is on the European side, across from the actual Asia Minor, what was the landmass of Turkey and all that. In the Sea of Marmara, which is like just south of the Black Sea, it's kind of like above the Aegean Sea and what they call the Dardanelles Strait, which is kind of like right below it. And what happened over time was that Constantinople eventually became the capital of what is the Eastern Roman Empire, which broke off from the Western Roman Empire. And people started later calling it Byzantine or Byzantine Empire, which will last up to modern times, or almost modern times, like 1453, late Middle Ages, really. And they actually called it that because of the fact that the actual city of Constantinople was built on top of an old ancient Greek city that had been there for years in northwestern Turkey, which was called Byzantian or Byzantian, was usually how they pronounced it, basically. And so the name Byzantine or Byzantine, it's pronounced either way, would basically be stuck as a name that they would call later the Eastern Roman Empire. They say the actual people called it Romania for some reason, because the term Roman, and in Roman Empire or something like that is, of course, also used as well. Constantine did have his own dynasty, which pretty much I think all of them were Christian, except I think there was one guy that was named, what was his name? I thought it was Lucian. I think Lucian was the only emperor that was a pagan who tried to convert back to I think that was the guy that tried to convert back or something like that. They killed him off or something like that. I think that was the last pagan emperor they had pretty much after that. But yeah, his dynasty would decline in the 360s. And then they had another dynasty that would come in that was called the Theodosian one. That one's like considered one of the last major dynasties that's in like the later part of the Roman Empire before it like kind of splits up, permanently after that. And it had an emperor that was named, bring him up here, named Theodosius that would come in, Theodosius the Great, as they called him. And he was considered to be one of the last great emperors, really before you get this permanent split between the East and the West that never gets back together at that point. And he was actually at one point sole ruler of the empire, like from 392 to 395, like 3 or 4 years, he actually ruled over the East and the Western parts of the empire. And that was actually the last time it happened. Nobody else ever did that after that. And so pretty much, the empire split permanently after that. It never got back together. And I'll get to it later, but the Western Empire would eventually collapse away and all that. The one thing that Theodosius is known for, he's the one that, like it says there, he accelerated the whole Christianization of the Roman Empire. He issued this edict in 380 that was called the Edict of Thessalonica, basically. What it did was it made Christianity the state religion. Nissian, of course, the Nissian version of it, not the Arian one. And so that became the main religion of the Roman Empire. If you were pagan, that's when you got in big trouble. If you're pagan, they imprisoned you or killed you. So they banned paganism, throughout the Roman Empire. I think if you were like Jewish or something, it was different because that was considered like an older religion. They went back further, all of that. I think they stopped taxing them and all that, Jews, but basically, yeah, they banned it. And you can see there, he actually went on to even ban, he got rid of like the Olympic Games and all that. That was actually got rid of in the 390s in the 4th century CE. And so they didn't even have Olympics anymore because that was kind of associated with pagan religions and all that in the past. Now, after he died, of course, he had these two sons named Honorius and Arcadius, and they split the empire between them. Honorius got the western half, and Arcadius got the eastern half, and they never got back together. So pretty much they never unified pretty much. And what happened was after Theodosius died and all that, the western half of the empire started going down. Is one of the things that, of course, would occur. And, of course, one of the things that's going to occur, if you know about it, in the Western Empire, is that it's going to basically, get overrun by all these different barbarians that come in afterwards. You have the fall of the Western Empire, which is very, very famous at the end of the Roman Empire. And that's mostly why it declined. There was other reasons for it too, internal reasons and all that that caused it. But mostly barbarian incursions into the Roman Empire would pretty much contribute to its collapse, because they would come in and actually take over that part of the empire, and they would basically just carve it up and create their own states. Was one of the things that would actually occur. And kind of talk about that a little bit. A lot of it was caused by the fact that the Germanic peoples between like the fourth, especially between the 4th and 8th centuries, started kind of migrating throughout Europe and all that at the time. This started way back, even back to the time of like Marcus Aurelius and all that, like the Marcomannic Wars. And they usually call it the period of the migration of the Germans, or migration period of the Germans. I think in Germany, they sometimes call it the Völkerwanderung, which means the wandering of the people, is what it meant. And a lot of the Germanic people started leaving Germany for different reasons. One was because the Roman Empire was obviously more successful than where they were in Germania. So a lot of them wanted to go there, make more money and stuff like that. Like people want to come to America, make a living, stuff like that. But also they say that the Huns, if you know about the Huns and all that, the Huns basically, barbarians like that, pushed the Germans out of Germania. That's what caused them to migrate, of course, throughout the region. So it was a combination of not just Germans, but all these other non-Germans that kind of caused the whole, the Roman Empire in the West to actually decline and all that. And the Romans also needed them for soldiers, a lot of the Germans. And so a lot of these Germans were actually brought in, and they were used as what they call foederati, which were hired mercenaries, or what we call auxiliary forces, is what they called them. The word foederati meant ally, and they would hire a lot of these people to field the Roman armies. And if you study about like between the 4th and 5th centuries, by the time you get up to like the end of the Roman Empire in the West, most of the Roman armies are all Germans, just about. Even the generals are Germans, or they're part German, or something like that. The Romans also wanted them to pay taxes as well, because I guess they didn't have enough revenue to run the state at the time. These are all examples of different types of Germanic peoples that would migrate into the Roman Empire. You got the Goths, of course, were probably the two most famous that came in because they had these two groups called the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths. They had the Vandals, they had the Franks, the Burgundians, Anglo-Saxons, like the Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes. And so those are all examples of different types of barbarians, really Germanic peoples. They called them barbarians, is what they called them, that come into the empire. And probably not going to have time to do everything on that today because I'm running out of time today. But you can see, like in the West, it just gets overrun of all these different invasions. You see there, which I guess I'll probably finish up on. I'll probably get that done on next week because I'm running out of time today. But I'll probably wrap up talking about the collapse of the Western Empire. And then probably what I'm going to probably do next, I guess I'll go into the Middle Ages is likely what I'm going to do because I know next week and the week after, I'm only going to have 3 days left lecture-wise. So it's looking like that's all probably going to have time to lecture on will be the Roman Empire in the Middle Ages. So anyway, that's it for this week. Of course, don't forget, like I said, about assignments that are due. I told you, of course, you need to be turning in your book report this week. Oh, by the way, I am kind of leaving it open for a while throughout the whole week, probably till Saturday if you want to turn it in. But pretty much I will be taking book reports this week. And then don't forget about those 2 Canvas quizzes that are still up. We're probably not going to have too many Canvas quizzes after this. I don't think I'm going to have any pretty much, but I will have like one more vocab that I'll probably try to post this week. And that's probably going to be it. So that's it. Hope y'all have a good weekend coming up. By the way, if you have any questions about the lecture or comments about the lecture, let me know on my YouTube channel. You can, of course, send me comments, questions for bonus and all that. And I will be posting this lecture, of course, to my YouTube channel, of course, after I finish streaming. So y'all take care. Hope y'all have a good weekend coming up later in the week and all that. And y'all take care. So that's it for today. So y'all take care.